Yeah, and the declaration also, it made a special mention of its commitment to fight patriarchy, actually. So how does Cuba's fight against the vestiges of patriarchal rule, specifically their recent adoption of their family's code, how does that resonate in African countries now?
Well, I think one on the question of patriarchy is that so many of the Cuban professionals are women, right? I mean, sometimes usually 60% of the medical professionals, 60% of the lawyers, right? So many of them are women, right? So that's one of the tremendous successes Cuba has had, and also in increasing. Cuba is one of the countries with the highest representations of women in its national parliament, right? So I think that's one of an example as well, right? Through the healthcare, as we know, as the health of populations improve, right? We have it lifts the burden off of women as well, right? And then within Cuba's very advanced family code, right? And we know there's a whole contestation, and she's kind of spoken about this, right across the world, even in Cuba, right across the world, we have the penetration of evangelical Christianity, right? Which tends to be extremely conservative, right? Patriarchal in its conceptions, homophobic, and so forth. Cuba's conception of a family code is so democratic, right? Where it represents a diversity in which families and relationships can form, and that these are not only recognized, they're also legitimate and legal in the eyes of the state, right? This is something that can have an impact in Africa as well, right? Okay. And so I think in terms of, opening up the society to recognize, right, that you have a whole diversity of the way people express their sexuality, they can organize their family, and these can make the very profound contributions to development as well, right? And
Cikiah, do you have anything on that?
No, I think Isaac said it all.
All right. What do African youth think of the Cuban Revolution and of Fidel from your perspective?
I remember attending a conference, the All African Peoples Conference, the 60th anniversary of All African Peoples Conference in Ghana in 2018. I remember sharing with Isaac and a number of people when I came back that Africa is going through a fundamental shift. I saw that with the young people. I could hear from the discussion that was going on the conference floor, what the kind of question they were asking, the kind of discussion they were engaging, especially in the French African-speaking country. I'm not surprised at all of any of the things that is happening there. Again, I know people that literally from the continent that live in Toronto who approached, up until last week, they approached some of us in the Caribbean of trying to get into establish better relationship, understand better relationship with Cuba. Primarily from the point of view of trying to influence the host government in the country and begin to do some work around Cuba. So the extent to which the West was engaged with a whole series of anti-Cuban propaganda, I think slowly but surely, those are dissipating. It's not as effective as it used to be. And I'm sure with one of the benefits of the technology, internet, is better communication between people across the world. And I have no doubt that the attitude on the continent with young people are changing tremendously. And you're going to see a better establishment of relationships. As Isaac indicated, a number of African professionals are trained in Cuba. They're going back into their society. They could speak about their own practical experience, talk about the myth and the misinformation that's been spread about Cuba. So I'm sure with time things will improve.
And if I may say so as well, I mean, one of the things we're seeing is these youth are increasingly coming forward, right, calling for transformation of the societies. A colleague of ours that we work with, who works with me at Dalhousie University in the Black and African Diaspora Studies program, Chevy Eugene, is involved in organizing a lot of gathering of young people in Africa. In fact, he has a conference at the end of March in Zambia, bringing together young people, right, who are working in a sense, right, like inside Africa to basically mobilize, African intellectuals, right? Okay, African endogenous thought for Africa itself, right? And you see the same thing in Latin America as well. I mean, what's happening is very interesting is that so many of the, what we call ideas, the Black radical tradition, so to speak, these ideas of the 60s and the 70s, right, are suddenly finding resurgence and traction among So, and within that context, here you have Cuba, a country that has the legacy of underdevelopment that comes from being a colony of the Spanish, right? The exploitation of Spanish, the legacy of being a protectorate and therefore exploited the neocolonial domination from the United States, and then facing this massive economic blockade from the United States, right? Okay. Yet, despite all of this, it's been able, with the twists and turns, right? Okay, and the problems that it has, right, to accomplish so much, right? And I think people, and to have this vibrant culture, this vibrant internationalist policy, right? And I think that's inspiring a lot of people, a lot of young people and so forth. They're looking for a way to transform the world, right? And I think one of the things too, we should also remind here, is that, it's been pushed to the sidelines because of the global, we see what's unfolding in Gaza, with the genocide that's unfolding. We see a global conflagration, the geopolitical contradictions, right? We see these contestations between new blocks emerging. What's been pushed to the side is the ecological disaster that looms over all of us, right? Okay. And within that, Cuba has a plan to 2100, right? Of how to, how do you wrestle with this? Both first as a country of the global south and as an island, right? Okay. How do you wrestle with this existential challenge, right? And of course, within this, going back to the danger of world war, going back to the issue of question of peace and the idea of a just international economic order, Cuba has been one of the most profound voices, right? Consistent, right? On the idea of basically the democratization of the United Nations and therefore of international relations, right? Of establishing fair and fair and just trade and economic relations on the world scale, right? Cuba has been the most consistent and profound voice on this. And this has been going back at least to the 60s, right? And Cuba has been a consistent voice, and people look to that, right? They look for that for inspiration as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we could honestly go on. There's so many other questions that I have, but I don't want to take up too much of your evening. And I know for Isaac, especially you're in Halifax, so it's a bit later there. So we'll probably have to wrap it up. So I guess a question that I think we should end with is, what does Africa mean to Cuba? We've talked about it, but what does Africa mean to Cuba?
Well, Cuba is Africa, Africa is Cuba. Enough emphasis is not placed on the role of Cuba in the liberation of Southern Africa. I genuinely believe that that history have not yet been complete by no stretch of the imagination. If you think of it, that the vast number of Africans who left in chain and go back as soldiers, just think of that psychological transformation and what it means. A large part of the admiration for Cuba has to do with the mere strength of its determination to fight for liberation, to fight for the dignity of humanity. And so that, for me, to some extent, especially those of us in the diaspora, is not fully explored and begin to talk about what it means and psychological transformation. Isaac touched on, for example, what the South African soldiers were discussing. In Glacier's book, I saw where he talks about the soldiers who get injured, the white soldiers going back to the army. There's a ripple psychological effect, and the South African army itself, the demoralization that was taking place. Equally, we need to begin to think of what it meant for Black soldiers to go back to Africa and liberate the mother's homeland. That's a beautiful sign, a beautiful picture in history. And I do hope as time goes on, we will better understand the importance of that, and we could develop some more reciprocal kind of relationship. So Africa is Cuba, Cuba is Africa.
I just say that sums it up. Probably Cuba is Africa, Africa is Cuba. And I think it's, one of the things we can point out is Cuba's role in Africa is a testament to the power of international solidarity, the willingness of a small nation to defy the world's great powers in the name of justice and freedom. Story of sacrifice, determination, and its transformative impact of collective action on the course of history.
There's no match to Cuban internationalism. There isn't any other country that have demonstrated that level of internationalism as Cuba has. You know, as you said, Isaac, starting in 1961, 2 years after the revolution, Cuba was sending assistance to Algeria. During that young embryonic stage of the revolution, they would begin to make sacrifice. Even to the point of disrupting, you had not mentioned a small point, but significant one, disrupting the relationship they were developing with Morocco in terms of engaging in trade relationship with Morocco. They decided that they are going to disrupt that in favor of liberation movement. So that is critically important.
Okay. Well, this has been a really great discussion, and we'll have to do something like this again soon, but we really appreciate the report back on the conference, and thank you both of you for your insight, and I am sure that the audience is going to get a lot out of this. So
yeah, that's
Isaac's
baby.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
we'll
you,
do it again
Samantha.
soon.
Thank you, Rob. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Take
Good
care.
evening.
Okay.
Take
bye.
care. Bye-bye.